Senator Ma.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Mr. President, Vice President. Mr. Vice President, let me bring this debate back to some degree of sanity and reality. The government clearly is desperate to just grasp at anything in order to justify what is before us. Mr. President, Mr. Vice President, what is before this honorable Senate today is not the land and building tax bill. That is not before us. What is before us is the government property tax amendment bill 2024. That is what is before us. And what is the government, Mr. President, seeking to do? The government, Mr. President, in this measure that is before this honorable House, is seeking to do a couple things. They are seeking to allow the Board of Inland Revenue to cause a notice of assessment to be issued on or before the 30th of June 2024 only. And we will deal with why that has been introduced in the legislation that we are currently debating. It is also seeking to allow the minister, by order, to alter the time frame for doing certain acts as outlined in the clause that we have before us in the legislation. It is also seeking, Mr. President, to allow the government, through the minister, to amend Schedule 1 in order to bring about and to replace affirmative with negative as it relates to resolution. That is what is before us. And, Mr. President, what is before us is the government is seeking to lower the rate of tax, property tax, only on 200,000 residential owners. May I repeat? Not 400,000, but only 200,000 residential owners. The minister came to this parliament and amended the law in order to satisfy the valuation rule. So the threshold will no longer be 400,000, but only 200,000. So, Mr. President, that is what is before us today. I want to say from the outset, Mr. President, that the right to shelter is a fundamental human right. And no government, in whatever shape and form, should ever be given the authority or the right to deprive a citizen, to deprive you, me, and any citizen of this country of their right to the enjoyment of such a fundamental right of shelter. The government, like a piper, drunk, Mr. President, and they are just scrambling. And that is why we are here today. They are scrambling. And I'll tell you why they are scrambling, Mr. President. Under this Minister of Finance, the government of Trinidad and Tobago has destroyed and crushed the economy of this country. And they are now coming to pick the pockets of the residential owners of properties in Trinidad and Tobago by imposing a ghost tax. That is what they are doing. So, Mr. President, what has happened under this regime? Because we have to put this debate in some perspective. This property tax, which is a form of constructive fraud, did not come about just so. The government did not bring it to the parliament just so. It is against a background. The Prime Minister is on record as saying, if we do not impose the property tax on the population, we will have to go to the International Monetary Fund. That is what the Prime Minister said at some meeting in San Fernando recently. So, why are we here? We are here, Mr. President, Mr. Vice President, because the government of Trinidad and Tobago has brought this economy to its knees. That is why the government is seeking to impose this draconian and dreaded property tax on the people of this country. They run out of cash. There's a cash flow crisis in Trinidad and Tobago today. Cash flow crisis. Mr. President, do you know, as we speak, this government has spent over $500 billion in the last 9 years in this country? May I repeat, Mr. Vice President? This government has spent over $500 billion over the last 8.5 years. And they have borrowed, and they are going to borrow up to a ceiling of $45 billion in less than 9 years. That is what we are faced with. And you know, Mr. Vice President, as we speak, Trinidad and Tobago's foreign exchange reserves is at its lowest for 20 years. We are now $5.6 billion in our foreign exchange reserves. When they came to office, it was 11.5 billion US dollars. Today, Mr. Vice President, we are 5.6 billion US. That is where they have taken us. So what has happened, Mr. President, is that they have come to pick the pocket of the middle class, to pick the pocket of the working class, to pick the pocket of the ordinary people, so that they can continue, Mr. President, to have a wonderful time at the expense of the population. Ask the Minister of Finance, which is Alora Apartments, how is he benefiting? And you're calling on me to pay property tax? Ask the Minister of Tourism, how is he benefiting? But you're coming to ask me to pay property tax? Ask the Prime Minister how he's benefiting in a 5-apartment place at Land 8. But you're coming to ask me and ordinary people to pay property tax? Ask Inez Gate, 46 private apartments, how have they benefited from the largesse of this government? And
President,
you're coming to
on a point of
me to
order.
tell me to pay property tax?
Mr.
President?
There's a point of order being raised.
Mr. President, Standing Order 46. 6, there were clear imputations of improper motives leveled against the Prime Minister in those comments.
Senator Mark, the examples you use are supported by 46.6. I ask you to dismiss, desist from making such comments and stick to the items at hand.
Evidence that we will bring on the platform. We have the evidence. You come on the platform, Minister, and challenge me, and I'll deal with you. Mr. President, let us deal with the reality. Let us deal with the reality. This government has engaged in a kind of activity in which the entire process is riddled with inaccuracies, inconsistencies, anomalies, and contradictions. And you come here today trying to justify, trying to advance a policy that will pauperize the middle class and allow you in the final analysis to tamper with their castle, which is their home. Because in the Property Tax Act, if in the final analysis you cannot pay the government your property tax, they will come and seize your home. That is what they will do. They will come and seize your homes. That is what the government will do. It is in the law. So come and tell me it's not true. So, Mr. President, let's deal with the reality. And I want to say this very clearly. If the root of a plant, if the root of a fruit tree is poisoned, all the fruits from the branches emanating from that fruit tree, if you consume them, they will kill you. Mr. President, what is happening here is simply this. The government is seeking in this measure to extend the assessment notice that the Board of Inland Revenue can issue from March the 31st, 2024, under Section 17, by creating a new 17A. only for 2024. That will allow them to issue assessment notices in and latest June 30th. But you know what, Mr. President? The minister is supremely silent on what will happen on the 30th of September. He's not telling us, and he's not telling the taxpayers, the property owners, whether 30th of September will be extended by 3 months. He has left the 30th of September intact, even though he has increased the period from March 31st to June 30th. But you must pay your tax, according to the minister, by the 30th of September, or face a 10% immediately on that sum that is outstanding, and then they put a draconian 15% rate of interest. And if in a year you can't pay it, they come in to take your fridge, your stove, your bed, your mat, your curtain, in order to do what? To recover their property tax. I want to warn Trinidad and Tobago. This government is out to create not a home-owning democracy. They are out to create a homeless autocracy. That is what they are committed to doing. Creating a homeless autocracy and not a home-owning democracy. I want to tell the people of Trinidad and Tobago that the United National Congress is committed to the creation and the construction and the building of a home-owning democracy in Trinidad and Tobago. That is what we are committed to doing. Mr. President, Mr. Vice President, there are 2 levels that we have to deal with. We have to deal with the valuation of land bill or act, and we have to deal with the property tax act as it relates to objections. Mr. President, I have 2 retired friends living in the corridor who have received notices of valuation for their simple 3-bedroom homes. And you know what these curbside field assessors and roadside assessors value their property at? And the Commissioner of Valuation said to them, Mr. Vice President, they say you, without your permission, without your leave, without you even seeing these people, they are telling you the annual rental value of your 3-bedroom house is $265,000. And they say when you convert that on a monthly basis, you could rent your house for $20,000. That is what they're telling people. A house that cannot be rented for $5,000. They are telling you that you can get $20,000. And then they come and they give you an assessment notice from the Board of Inland Revenue. You have to pay $7,000 or lose your property. $7,000. No, Mr. Vice President, tell me where a pensioner will be able to get $7,000. And don't tell me about no deferral. Do not tell me about deferrals. Deferrals are only for 2 years. And you have to go back and beg the Board of Inland Revenue to extend your time. Which elderly citizen have that capacity to do that? This is a criminal act on the part of this government. Mr. President, what is even worse, Vice President? They tell you and me to object. We object within 21 to 30 days. You send your objection to the Commission of Evaluation. You know what the Commission of Evaluation tell you, Mr. Vice President? Thank you. Thank you. And you never hear from him or her again. You know what is even more dangerous, more disturbing, more troubling? Is the fraud that they are committing on the poor people of this country. Mr. Vice President, under the law, there is supposed to be a valuation tribunal so I can take my objections to. This government is yet to establish the valuation tribunal. So what is the purpose of I objecting? And the minister telling me I have to pay my tax by the 30th of September or lose my home. No, that is banditry of the highest order. Why are you bringing legislation to Parliament to allow us to debate it, and you have not established the valuation tribunal for the people to go and complain? Mr. President, how that can be fair? How can that be fair? How can the government justify that? This is illegal. This is unconstitutional. This is a breach of my fundamental rights. Where is my access to justice that I'm entitled to under the Constitution? Am I not entitled to the protection of the law as any other citizen? But if you deny me fundamental justice and access to justice, are you not breaching my fundamental rights that is enshrined under Section 4 of the Constitution? That is what they are doing. And Mr. President, it is worse. It is worse. You go to the Board of Inland Revenue, Mr. President, and they give you a form because you're objecting. My colleagues got an assessment notice for $7,000. He can't pay that. Another one in Dabadi, who have a 3-bedroom house, he get a valuation of over $300,000. They say you can get $30,000 a month. And then they tell him he had to pay $10,000. Did the minister talk about that? He talked about Federation Park. He talked about the ordinary man and woman. They want to steal your home. They want to take away your property. That is what they want to do. So, Mr. Vice President, hear what is going on. You go to the Board of Inland Revenue under Section 17H of the Property Tax Act, and what do you do, Mr. President? You have a right to object, and they have a right to tell you the procedures that you must use in order to object. Mr. Vice President, you go to them, they give you a form. And they say, thank you. Thank you. Good day. They take your form, they put it in a box, and they say, bye-bye. You have no acknowledgement. You have no receipt. You know the VAT, corporation tax. If you go to the Board of Inland Revenue, to the VAT office, and you object to the amount of charges they are putting on you, Mr. Vice President, those charges, that portion of your income that they are saying that they must take, cannot cannot be tampered with. They have to put that in escrow until your matter is resolved. That is what it is under VAT and under the Corporation Act. I'm advised. But Mr. Vice President, when it comes to your property tax, they give you a form to fill out, and then they tell you goodbye. So you get no justice at the valuation tribunal level, where you get, Mr. Vice President, your valuation notice. No justice. How you get peace? This is provocation here. This is provocation of the highest order. Mr. President, no justice at valuation. No justice at the Board of Inland Revenue. So what are the masses to do? Go on your knees and bend the knees before the emperor and beg the emperor for forgiveness? What are they to do? Mr. Vice President, what are they to do?
Attribution, you don't turn your back to the chair.
Sorry, I apologize. I love looking at you. Sorry about that. Mr. Vice President, let me indicate to you. What are these people to do? And then, so you have no justice at the Board of Inland Revenue, none at the valuation level, and you're telling me I must pay property tax. Listen, you see, Mr. Vice President, for me, I know what I will do in. I know what I will tell the people to do, but I can't tell you here. And if they want to jail everybody, you want to send us to jail? Take us. We will not pay that unjust tax. Mr. President, that tax is unjust. But I won't tell you, Mr. Vice President, what I will do. So, Mr. Vice President, hear what goes on. You have a bunch of amateurs employed at the valuation division, underqualified, and they are going out there to assess our properties. There is a Royal Institute of Chartered Surveyors that would issue licenses. And every field assessor of whatever rank or grade must have a license issued by the Royal Institute of Chartered Surveyors. Mr. Vice President, you know what is going on? People are going out there as field assessors. They don't have the qualifications, and they are assessing your property. They are not fit for purpose. And that is why, Mr. Vice President, we are in this mess that we are in today. They are valuing your property at $300,000 and $400,000, saying that you could rent your property for $30,000 a month, and you have to pay $15,000 by the end of September. Otherwise, you lose your home. This is madness. This is not fair. Mr. Vice President, I would have thought that taxation would have been based on the foundation of reality of a property. If I am getting $20,000 for my property, and I'm getting $20,000 in my hands every month, you can charge me on that if you wish. But Mr. President, it is ludicrous for the government to assume that your property is valued at $20,000. You have no intention of renting your property, but they put this fictitious value onto your property. And they say you have to pay a percentage of that, which is assessed by the Board of Inland Revenue. And you have to pay that by the 30th of September because the government has misappropriated our funds. The government has mismanaged our economy. The government has squandered the resources of the state and the people. They have engaged in wasteful expenditure, and they're coming to tax you and me and us because they have run out of cash.
Yes.
Why must you do that? Mr. President, I want to indicate to my colleagues here, there was a revolution in the United States against the British when they tried to impose taxation without representation. Mr. President, the last time I checked the Constitution of the Republic of TNT, there's only one lawmaking body under our Constitution. And that lawmaking body is the Parliament of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago. What we have been doing is ceding. We have been ceding our lawmaking function to the executive. And that is why the executive could be so contemptuous, insulting, and disrespectful of the parliament and parliamentarian to tell us, I am prepared to remove affirmative, replace it with negative, because it is unproductive, Mr. President, to come to this parliament to justify any decision the minister may take to increase or decrease the rate of property tax. Could you imagine that? We are responsible under Section 75(1) to scrutinize the activities and decisions and actions of the government. Yet still the government is coming here to tell us they must get the power at any time to determine whether your tax that you pay on your property will be 3%, will be 2%, will be 1%, or whether, Mr. Vice President, it will be 6%, 7%, 8%, 9%, 10%. Now tell me, that is not equivalent to tyranny? That is not equivalent to misconduct in public office? That is not equivalent to an abuse of authority by the government? How can we as a parliament agree to give any minister, and I am not talking about our current Minister of Finance, any Minister of Finance. Why must we give any Minister of Finance that kind of power? No, Mr. President, we are saying to the government of Trinidad and Tobago, if you want to amend if you want to remove affirmative and replace it with negative, you have to come better than that. Mr. President, I don't know if you recalled, but we brought in 2018 amendments to this particular piece of legislation back then, because the minister was coming to amend the Property Tax Act in order to give him the power to just whimsically
Senator, you have 5 minutes remaining.
the schedule from without any kind of scrutiny. And we say no. And the minister is on record as saying, Mr. President, the minister is on record as saying, Mr. Imbert, let me quote him. Yes, Madam Chairman, let us go now to our proposed amendment. And let me explain our proposed amendment to Senator Mark. And he goes on, Mr. President, yes, he can see things our way. The important and fundamental schedule that would impact upon people is Schedule 1. Schedule 1 is the rate of tax. And I am proposing an amendment before we deal with yours that would make any minister responsible for taxes required to come and debate a change in the rate. Mr. President, this is what the minister said on Hansard, that before any minister changes taxes, he must come to this parliament and justify it. What has changed? Why has the minister reneged on his commitment to parliament? Mr. Vice President, let me make it very clear. The United National Congress is totally and completely opposed to this amendment to the Property Tax Act. I want to go further and say, Mr. Vice President, we are completely opposed to property tax in its current formation. We are not committed to going with this annual rental value. It is oppressive against the people of this country. And I want to tell Mr. Vice President, the Honorable Minister, Larry Hawaii is on public record, and I have it here before me, telling the whole country that the government of the People's Partnership had no interest in introducing property tax, in spite of what the minister said. No interest. It is on public record, Mr. Vice President, that Mr. Larry Hawaii has said that, and said that publicly. My colleagues and so on will quote from it.
Don't worry, I know quote it.
I can tell you that both Mr. Imbert, then opposition member of Parliament for the Gomata Northeast, and the Prime Minister, the Honorable Dr. Keith Rowley, the Gomata West, at their conference at the Crown Plaza, on record, they are not going to introduce property tax. They are on public record. And to further consolidate this position, in 2009, Dr. Rowley in this parliament is on record as saying poor people do not support property tax, and he is not in favor of property tax. That is on the public record. So both the Prime Minister, when he was in the opposition, was against property tax. The Minister of Finance was against property tax. And now the government is coming here to tell the country, Mr. Vice President, that we must support property tax. Mr. Vice President, we do not support the measure. We do not support this bill that is before us. And I want to tell you, Mr. Vice President, in closing, the PNM had operatives in the Ministry of Finance. And those operatives frustrated the daylight of the, and I know their names, I could call them, but I won't call their names, I know them. It's women, and all of them. And they frustrated, Mr. Vice President, our attempt to repeal the Property Tax Act. That government had their plans and their operatives frustrating the UNC in making efforts to repeal the proper. We were always committed to repealing
Senator Mark.
tax.
Yes,
Mr. Vice President, I thank you for the opportunity.